Before we begin the presentation, I want to let you know that there were 2 times during the presentation when the microphones were not working correctly. The sound quality does go down during those time periods, but please stick with the presentation as we did resolve it both times. Thank you.
Thanks for inviting Solomon and I to come out
everybody.
and talk to you about one of our favorite things, which is Dr. Ross Greene's collaborative and proactive solutions for children who have behaviors that might be a tad bit annoying to other people. Okay? Also, as a disclaimer, or themselves. Yeah. Right? As a disclaimer, 100% these are my favorite kids to work with in the whole entire world, right? 100%. And you don't often hear that, but what I find is that one of the trade-offs for children who have some lagging executive functioning skills is that usually they have a pretty intense sense of humor, and they pretty much make us crack up all the time, every day. Here's an example, right? I was seeing a little one and a guardian over the summer, and the guardian was, like sometimes guardians do, adults do, kind of trying to like goad the child into tattling on themselves, right? You tell Dr. Mac what you did. You tell her what you did, right? So the kids, I took all my birthday money to the auction, to the livestock auction, and I won 2 puppies, right? And I was probably one of the only people in the world that was actually happy when our dog died, because it was so much work for me to take care of the dog. So I was laughing, thinking about all the work that this family had to do, right? And the guardian's like, no, tell her the whole rest of it too. And the kid's like, what? And so the guardian's like, tell him what you named the dogs. So he said, oh, well, one of the dogs I named Greg, which automatically had me laughing for about 5 minutes straight, because it's so weird to think of a kid calling some mutt dog, Greg, right? So I was laughing hysterically. And he said, well, wait till you hear what I named the other dog. I said, what'd you name the other dog? And he says, Peyton Manning. So the other thing, besides the fact that I'd never want to have another dog in my life, is I don't know anything about sports. So I did not know what he was talking about, and I just thought it was really weird that he gave a dog a formal first name and last name. And so sometimes you just try and fill space with children, and so you say, well, I wonder why you named your dog Peyton Manning. And he said, well, duh, it's the greatest football player that ever lived, right? So then I was dying again. So I really, really enjoy working with this population of children and adolescents. And I also don't clinically treat some parents that are also, as we would describe as having some lagging executive functioning skills, but I enjoy working with those adults as well in their capacity as a parent or a guardian of a child. So thank you for inviting us. We have a lot to get through. I'm going to let Solomon step in and give you a little tale as well.
So my tale is that I am a fresh parent. I have a little one who's turning 3, and she runs the house, and she has a fever. And then I have another one who's about to turn 7, and these kids couldn't be any different, these 2 girls. Like they are fire and ice. The way they go about handling everything couldn't be any different. And that's very challenging for me because I have to change my style. So I'm a psychiatrist. I'm a child psychiatrist, and I see the trap that my kids lay out in front of me. And in certain situations, they know what they're doing. And I know that they know what they're doing, and I know I can't avoid it. So we'll learn a little bit about sort of different parenting styles, and I'm definitely guilty of being a plan A parent, and it's what I call dad mode. Mm-hmm. It's when you run into a room and you're like, oh my God, what is going on here? It's immediately that's a problem, gotta solve it, give me your list, got time issues, let's hurry and go on with our lives. And the whole thing that we're missing is there's somebody about this high or this high that's dealing with...
Or this high.
Or this high, yeah. Being 5'6", most people are like this. So when people are struggling, if you try to go into a situation head first to solve the issue, you still have to clean up the mess afterwards. So it doesn't matter whether you're dealing with a coworker this way or your child. If you walk into a situation, make sure everybody's feeling okay first. Things usually turn out all right, more cases than not. And that's what this is about, is reaching that middle ground.
Right, working together with children rather than doing things to them, right? Which is, as medical professionals, mostly what we do with children is we do things to children, right? We medicate children. We send children to laboratories to check their blood for different illnesses. We do neurological exams to children. This is something very, very different. And I want to review a little bit of basic biology before we get into the sort of soup to nuts, how to do Plan B with your own children. And some of you, this is going to be really, really basic. And I hope for some of you...
Nora?
What?
Talk louder.
Talk louder, okay. Luckily, I can talk very loud.
That's actually perfect, thank you.
Okay. So what do I have here? What is this?
A brain.
It's a model of a brain. They won't let me bring real brains,
She's tried.
even though I'm a researcher, because they're against me at the hospital, right? The Institution Review Board has it out for Dr. McNamara. So this is a model of a brain. And when people think of brain, human brain, this is what they see, right? This pink, wrinkly, unusual-looking organ. But that's not actually the brain. This pink, wrinkly part of the brain is the cerebral cortex. It comes from two Latin words, cerebrus, which means head, and cortex, which means bark, like the bark of a tree. Because in medicine, we name everything after what it looks like. So it's head bark. Head bark is the cerebral cortex, right? This particular cerebral cortex, the Homo sapiens cerebral cortex, has only been on this planet for about 310,000 years, as far as we know, right? But it evolved on top of more primitive structures. How many people in the audience tonight are taxpayers, by the way? Thank you for paying your taxes, because one of the fun things that we get to do at work, or got to do at work for the past 10 years as part of the brain mapping project, was to do lots of functional MRI studies on typically developing kids and also kids with serious mood disorders. So we learned lots and lots of things about how typical brains develop and how that's different from kids that have different psychiatric presentations. So you want to see what's inside, what your cerebral cortex grew over, evolved over?
Yes.
Okay. Also, children love this fact, but if you are dissecting a brain, you can actually use a spoon to dissect the brain because it has the consistency of chilled butter. Because it's mostly fat, right? All right. So if we look on the inside, underneath the cerebral cortex, right, you'll see this really smallish area, and this area contains two really important organs. It's called the limbic system. The limbic system is very, very old, right? It's as old as the oldest mammals, which we think are 65 million years old, possibly even older. But the limbic system's two important organs are the amygdala, which is a small, there's actually two of them, one on each side of the brain, a small almond-shaped organ, an almond-sized organ, and amygdala is a Greek term for almond. The amygdala's job is to take in sensory information without any ability to think anything through and to generate an immediate motoric response for survival, for safety. Attached to the amygdala are the hippocampus, plural is hippocampi, which is Greek for terrifying seahorse. Because if you Because if you throw it on a dissecting tray, it looks exactly like a seahorse. That's why it's called the hippocampus, right? The hippocampus is the organ that allows us to form memories. And if you think about how important it is from an evolutionary survival perspective for memory to be intimately attached to emotion and affect, right? We really have to be able to access memories quickly if they have to do with survival. So, this newest part of the brain, right, the Homo sapiens sapiens cerebral cortex, thanks to you taxpayers, we can actually tell you what happens in different parts of the cerebral cortex. This part, which is right over your forehead, is the prefrontal and frontal cortex. If you believe in a soul, this is probably where it resides. If you don't believe in a soul, you could be comforted knowing that this part of the brain is the part of the brain that lights up in functional MRI studies when people are asked to ponder questions about God and religion. It's also the part of the brain where imagination lives. It's also the part of the brain where problem solving happens. It's also the part of the brain where people integrate everything that they know from a knowledge perspective with how that might affect the emotional well-being of themselves and other people should they make particular decisions. In fact, when we go through a list later of executive functions, most of the really important executive functions are in the prefrontal and frontal cortex. So the prefrontal and frontal cortex is the part of the brain that we want to engage when we're having Plan B conversations with children, right? So when a child is in full-on meltdown mode, which I like to call sensitivity attacks, or actually we actually also call it amygdalitis. The only part of their brain that's being perfused is the limbic system, okay? The limbic system cannot be reasoned with. The limbic system cannot be talked down. When your child has already blown, right, it's the same thing as having an emotional seizure. You cannot say anything in the moment, do anything in the moment, promise anything in the moment, threaten with anything in the moment that's going to change the course of that particular emotional seizure.
Except there's a lot you can do to make the situation worse.
Much worse.
But in terms of better, there's not a lot that you can add to an already hot fire to cool it off. That's not how this works.
It doesn't, and if you're here, and if you're lucky enough to have a child with amygdalitis, I am a former child with amygdalitis. My father will be taking autographs in the back after tonight's presentation. Then you've already figured out that things that other people tell you to try haven't been effective, like stickers. A sticker is just a sticker, right? Oh, what are some other horrible things we've told people to do?
This is my favorite. Ready? 1, 2.
2.5. 2 3/4.
Don't make me say 3.
Right, don't make me say 3. My mom used to take out the wooden spoon and wave it around because she was a pacifist, but she was so overwhelmed because she had 3 of us, right? I think what we were doing that particular day was we found all these hand mirrors in the bathroom, and we took hammers to the hand mirrors in the driveway, right? And my father was at the fire station, so my mom, bah! She would wave that wooden spoon and say, "Wait till your father gets home," right? Which we would laugh because nothing, that was never followed through on ever. So yeah, waving around a wooden spoon and saying, "Wait till your father gets home," not an effective strategy when your kids are doing things that you wish they'd not be doing.
Funny story about this is my eldest daughter, at one point, my wife, who's also a psychiatrist, said, she's being really stubborn. Why don't you do something? and I said, okay. And so she was sitting on the stairs reading a book, which she usually does, not wanting to do anything else but facial. I feel bad about punishing a kid for reading. It seems, But she's clogging the staircase, so it's really a safety hazard at this point. And so I tell her, it's time to clean this up and let's get going. And then I was like, I'm gonna do that 1, 2, 3 thing that I tell parents never to try. I'm just curious, what will happen? I've been told by Dr. McNamara for years that it's a terrible idea. So I tell my daughter, 1, and she flips out in tornado position. She's like, don't go to 2! Don't. And I look at my wife like, what? Has anybody done this before? And no. And we checked with the daycare. No, they don't do this. No one does. She just immediately sensed that there was an escalation, and that was enough to. The stairs didn't get cleaned. So, I had to clean up a little person instead. So that's, yeah.
So before we get started on the kind of conversations that can help children in the future not always go to amygdalitis meltdown mode, right? You, as the adult, need to understand that when they are in amygdalitis meltdown mode, that the best thing that we can do at the time is to just give them space and time and dignity until they cool down, right? Because if your child was having an epileptic seizure, I promise you wouldn't be shouting at them, threatening them, waving a wooden spoon in front of their face. You would be making sure that their body was safe. You'd wait for that seizure to pass, right? And then you'd take care of them afterwards because you'd be glad that the seizure was over, okay? So I promise you there are no magic words that help once the meltdown has started. There's also, and this is going to be very disappointing to many, many people in the audience, there are no magic pills, right? Thing is, even the diagnoses that we have right now in psychiatry are inadequate. And in 10 years, instead of saying, oh, you have generalized anxiety disorder, and you have oppositional defiant disorder, and you have ADD, and you have autism spectrum disorder, instead, we'll be able to send people for a functional MRI scan, or probably they'll invent something even cooler in the future, and we'll be able to say, oh, you have a hyperconnected limbic system, right? Or you have hypoconnectivity somewhere in your prefrontal and frontal cortex. So if you really think about what we do with our medications, it's very crude right now. Mm-hmm. It's like the Stone Age of medicine in psychiatry compared to the sophistication in other subspecialties. So it's literally like for some of these problems we're using like barbecue tongs to try and remove a splinter, right? Not sophisticated, not detailed. We don't have really great treatments yet. We don't have targeted gene therapies yet, but we will. But now what we have, in our arsenal, so to speak, are essentially 2 categories of treatments. There's one whole, dozens and dozens and dozens of different medicines whose job it is to try and cool down the amygdala. Right? We use all those kinds of medicines in child psychiatry. Do they work perfectly? No, they don't. They take the edge off if you're lucky. But I have plenty of kids who have not had an adequate response to a medication trial.
And I'll say this, a perfect response is the strangest thing that I can ever see on a day-to-day basis. So if your expectation on any psych med is a good resolution, like a solid 100% resolution, it's just, it doesn't work that way.
No.
Very, very rarely, like winning the lottery.
We have like a couple miracle cures in psychiatry. One is Narcan for opioid overdose, right? Which we got to see way before anyone else because we worked at the VA and there was a lot of opiate abuse in some of the VA guys. So we got to see that miracle all the time. The other miracle is a Ativan challenge or lorazepam challenge for people who are catatonic, or ECT if that doesn't work for people who are catatonic. That is the 2 things for sure that we can say you're going to see an immediate response, right? The whole other area of medical treatment in child psychiatry, though, is really about waking up, alerting the prefrontal and the frontal cortex. So that would be most of the stimulant medications and some of the alpha-2 agonists and some of the weirder medicines that I think I might be the only one in the world who uses, but for sure it's got some prefrontal cortex activity. So that's all we're doing as doctors. We're either trying to cool down the amygdala, wake up the frontal cortex. We know that they're not going to work 100%, but what we really want is for more and more parents to learn how to do this, so that if we are using medications, that we're sort of optimizing the kid's ability to have conversations with mom or dad or grandma or whoever's the guardian, right? Because when we have Plan B conversations, we're waiting until the child's at their calmest point during the day. The conversations themselves build new pathways in the prefrontal and frontal cortex. So the conversations themselves are actually rewiring the child's brain.
So this is much like any skill. You lose a hand in a tragic accident and you relearn how to use your non-dominant hand, you're rewiring stuff. The brain is very dynamic. It rewires based on the environment that you're in and the skills you use in that environment. This engagement style is a skill for you and the kid. The more you do it, the more they recognize it. So engagement is, an environment is almost like a skill. The more you expose someone to something, the better they respond. So in this way, this is less of a philosophy or a way to go about doing something, and more of a, if you could imagine how you would do this if you were practicing almost like a scene in a theater, like a scripted role play. It does play out like that, and it sounds hokey, but when you try it in the moment, it gets results. It really does cool off immediately. If you've got an emotional kid, you need to respond with an emotional answer. You can't take an emotional person and say, hey, you know what? It's not that bad. Here's 4 reasons why it's going to be okay right now. It's not going to work. So that's where we're coming from.
All right, can you advance to the next slide? So at the same time that Dr. Zaraa and I, through Dr. Findling, were funded by the Stanley Research Foundation to look at medical treatments for children with sustained mood symptoms, Dr. Ross Greene was at Harvard. He was funded by the Stanley Foundation to develop a psychotherapy for children with bipolar illness. And as was customary 20 years ago, the children at Harvard and some of the children at our own research site who did not have adult bipolar 1 illness, they didn't have any history of euphoric manias, they didn't have any history of decreased need for sleep. They were frighteningly explosive and aggressive and kind of cranky, crabby, and curmudgeonly a lot of the rest of the time. But they never had euphoric manias. But those were the children that got assigned a diagnosis of bipolar illness because of the changes between DSM-4 and DSM-5, right?
So there's no way to accurately, so the issue in psychiatry is if you have someone who's explosive, there's not a category that hits that just right. There's no real way to categorize it. It's if you ignore the explosion and look at all the rest that you can probably figure out what you're dealing with, but that's not the issue standing there right in front of you at the time. So a lot of times clinicians say, oh, it's loud and it causes a lot of damage. Oh, sounds like bipolar. It's like, no, that's not bipolar.
Yeah, where's the fun part of bipolar with that, right? Presentation. Zero. It doesn't appear. It's like the worst, most possible bipolar 6 illness or something like that. Because the thing is, you can always tell if someone's hypomanic or manic because they're sort of interesting and really fun to be around and have all these creative ideas, right?
Maybe for like 2 minutes.
And there's no abridged version ever. So Dr. Greene's psychotherapy that he developed at Harvard eventually became called collaborative and proactive solutions because it used to be called collaborative problem solving. But then what happened, as often happens in academia, is that Harvard decided, since he was employed by Harvard when he developed that as part of his research funding, that actually Harvard owns collaborative problem solving as a title, as a kind of treatment. So you don't ever want to Google collaborative problem solving because that's not what we're talking about. Harvard ended up changing the model in order to sort of turn a profit from the intellectual property. So we call it collaborative and proactive solutions, but it's been through lots and lots of different research studies in the past 20 years as well. Interestingly, one of those studies included the whole entire state of Maine's juvenile justice system. Now, Maine doesn't have the population that Ohio does, so their juvenile justice population was about 2,000 kids, right? And 3 years into implementing CPS for all of the children who are incarcerated, and if you think some of your kids are hard, I promise you there are harder kids out there. If you want to see what untreated amygdalitis and adverse childhood events can do to a kid, take a look at some of the videos on Cleveland.com from when there was a riot this summer at our own juvenile justice facility, right? These are very explosive, very aggressive children. They really are children, even though they look like they're big because they're 12 or 13 years old. 3 years after implementing CPS, Maine had to close half of their juvenile facilities because recidivism went from 93% to 17%. You want to know why collaborative and proactive solutions works in teenagers particularly well? Thank you, taxpayers, again, because when we did all the functional MRI studies, we learned that in adolescence there's a second period of synaptogenesis. Synaptogenesis is the process by which neurons grow connections to each other, right? So we're all born with about 100 billion neurons, 70 billion of which, right, are in our cerebellum, which coordinates movement.
That's the part I dropped.
Yeah. You guys know that old Ramones song, right? I'm a teenage lobotomy. Guess I'm gonna have to tell 'em I ain't got no cerebellum. All the girls are in love with me. I'm a teenage lobotomy. No punk fans here. Zero punk fans. That's great. Okay. Hope you enjoy listening to Duran Duran on your way home. So we used to think that synaptogenesis only happened between about the 18th week post-conception and about age 2.5, maybe 3. And that those 100 billion neurons, that their job during that period of development was to grow those connections, which is why a newborn's head grows so fast, like a tick almost, huh? Gorging itself with blood. But the reason the baby's brain grows so fast is because those connections are happening on average, right? On average, 1.8 million synapses per second. So the baby's experiences absolutely shape their brain and how their brain's going to function later. And then we thought, oh, well, the rest of the development is getting rid of connections that we don't need any longer. But now we know, because of the 10-year brain mapping project through the National Institutes of Health, that there's a second window of synaptogenesis, particularly in the prefrontal and frontal cortex, in adolescence. So can you go to the next slide? So we've covered this a little bit. Why are kids challenging? Is it because they don't care and they don't care if they're in trouble? Is there anyone here that likes to not do well and screw up all the time at work? Have people be mad at you and disappointed in you? No, I don't think that kids have trouble because they don't care. Our philosophy and the philosophy for collaborative and proactive solutions is that when children have well-developed skills to meet our expectations in particular environments, that they always prefer to do well. Stickers and punishments and threats and bribes all assume that children aren't doing what we want them to do because they don't care, so we need to increase their motivation, either through appealing to something they want or through scaring them and thinking that they're going to lose something or they're not going to have a privilege that they have right now. Right? Would that be accurate?
Pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Carrots and sticks, right? That's how it works.
Well, that's what we're taught. That's what we're taught. Carrots and sticks. How many people here have children who attend a school where you're given a dojo report? Yeah. What is a dojo? It's a stick if you're a kid that has lagging skills, right? Because you're just like, oh, hope my mom loses her phone.
That's where the plan comes in on how that can happen.
Right. How can I make my mom's phone break forever? Right. Is it a carrot for children who have well-developed skills? Yeah. Not for really healthy children. Right. Really emotionally healthy children realize that this is a ripoff, that they're getting some kind of reward or they're getting some kind of acknowledgement for something they didn't even work at. Right? It's not like that they've been really trying so hard to not squirm around in their seat or keep sharpening their pencil, right? That they don't need to do that, so they don't. And so they feel like we're not being good helpers, right? Most emotionally healthy children don't see that dojo, right, as fair, because they know until we actually poison them and make them believe in punishments and rewards. They know instinctively, right, that a grown-up's job is to help and that everybody needs something different. Not everybody needs the same thing, and not everybody should have the same kind of treatment in different environments. Can you advance to the next one? This we covered, so you can go to the next one too. Everybody prefers to do well. Nobody wants to be in trouble. Nobody wants to feel like they're screwing up all the time. So if we know that kids are challenging, we can learn about what's getting in the way for them, by actually having conversations with them during times when they're calm. But before we do that, we have to understand exactly what are their lagging skills, right? Because how many people in the audience are trained as neuropsychologists? I'm not. I'm not, right? And essentially, it used to be that the only way we could get a real sense of what our child or our particular child's list of lagging skills would be to wait a good 6 to 12 months to get in to see neuropsychology and have a really expensive battery of tests that essentially looks at executive functioning.
And the results for these really fancy tests that you waited so long for usually are things like your child is statistically significantly angry. Or sometimes they'll add anxious to that. And that's not really anything new. It doesn't tell you how it all fits into the daily grind. Your kid is the expert for that.
Yeah, that's why we're actually talking to them. So the other thing that's sort of annoying about neuropsych reports is that they're always like 50 pages long. Like, oh my God, who has time to read 50 pages, right, of Wisconsin card sorting test results? But apparently lots of people.
Testing. This one, it's probably a little easier.
Yeah. I like the shape of this one better than this. So what we have here is a handy-dandy tool that is available for free on the website called www.livesinthebalance.org, which has all of the paperwork needed if you want to learn how to do Plan B or CPS at home with your own children, or if you're a teacher in your classroom with your children. The website also has a walking tour of videos explaining to parents and to teachers sort of frequently asked questions and places where people feel like they get stuck when they're trying to do this. Because it doesn't feel natural at first, and it feels sort of awkward. So this also...
What Plan B does?
Plan B feels awkward at first. I always felt like when I was learning how to do it, that was best to practice at the post office.
I'll add this about Plan B. Plan B feels like, for a Plan A person who likes to talk loud, Plan B feels like people are missing the point, and we went on a side journey that might take a really long time, like the scenic route, and I'm not sure if it's worth it. The thing is it always is worth it. It's just my impatience at the moment is just adding to it, and I have to be aware of that and take myself out. And by that I mean get myself out of my own skin for a second and actually deal with what's happening with the little people.
All right, and so can we close out this PowerPoint and open up the ALSA PowerPoint, just so that people can see the different categories?
Dr. McIntyre now skips to page 12.
Essentially, the ALSA is a tool, an instrument that you can use to sort of map out and try and understand your child better before you sit down with them for the first time and try to have a Plan B conversation, which I promise you, the first time, you're going to mess it up. But luckily, your child will forgive you. You can advance. So all of the items on the ALSA all correspond to different executive functions. You can go to the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one. Here we go.
Dr. McIntyre is now on page 17.
So the reason that we want to go and spend it takes me about 2 hours to go through an ALSA on a particular kid, and I'm fairly well practiced in doing this, and I understand that it takes a long time because I need to get input from other adults that are important in that child's life, and it's worth having a long conversation about it. Kids that don't have these lagging skills, if they are in a situation, in an environment where their skill set doesn't allow them to be successful, do lucky things like they cry, whine, withdraw, pout, distract, or forget. Unlucky kids are the kids that swear, run away, throw, break things, threaten to end their own lives, threaten to kill other people, in the heat of the moment, right? So usually when things are settled down and they're calmed down, those things that they say in the throes of amygdalitis are no longer a risk or a concern when their cerebral cortex is the boss again. You can go to the next one. And you can go to the next one. These are excuses that are not helpful for understanding kids that are explosive. Interestingly, even though Solomon and I are psychiatrists, and we have to assign diagnoses to kids all the time, every day, the fact that the ALSUP doesn't assign diagnosis does not mean that, to me, it's not a helpful tool or a helpful way to understand children. In fact, I feel like we've gotten way too interested in psychiatric diagnoses really in the past 10 years. So
also, when you see the same 3 diagnoses on every kid walking through the door, they're all bipolar with ADHD and ODD, and after about your 1000th one, you need some other way to measure what's walking through the door, and this is a better way of doing that because these aren't 1,000 kids all identical, number one. 2, none of them have the diagnosis that really they're not in that order and not with bipolar.
right.
So.
All right. Next slide, please. All right. So let's think about these lagging skills that we think about from kid to kid.
Oh, just to clarify, but kids with bipolar need this too, because this is about how to manage an otherwise relatively normal situation for that age and that child, and making sure it doesn't add to the stress and the issues that the child already has.
Right.
Sorry.
So some of the executive functioning skills are cognitive, and some of the executive functioning skills have to do with how we relate to and communicate with other people, right? So these ones, difficulty handling transitions, difficulty doing things in a logical sequence, difficulty persisting in challenging tasks, poor sense of time, difficulty maintaining focus, difficulty considering likely outcomes or consequences of actions, difficulty considering a range of solutions to problems, right? We call that lack of cognitive flexibility in kids. Difficulty expressing needs, thoughts, or concerns in words, especially in particular environments at particular times. Difficulty understanding what is being said. Difficulty seeing the grays. Difficulty shifting from original idea or plan of action. So these are more cognitive executive functioning skills. And can you shift to the next one? These are social emotional skills that can be lagging. These are executive functioning skills. Difficulty managing emotional response to frustration so as to think rationally. Chronic irritability and anxiety, which impede problem solving. Difficulty handling unpredictability, inflexible, inaccurate interpretations and cognitive distortions. Difficulty attending to social cues, poor perception of social nuances, difficulty starting conversations or entering groups, difficulty seeking attention appropriately, difficulty appreciating how one's behavior affects others, difficulty empathizing with others, difficulty seeing how one comes across to others.
So this is where you start seeing where you've got what I call the dinosaur brain, starts interacting with more emotional and planning aspects. And if all those parts and pieces aren't working together perfectly, you can get any one of these combinations. Or all of them.
Right. So, and the thing is that when we're doing an ALSUP, the assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems, we also want to make sure that we're going through each item slowly and carefully, and that we're not lumping things together when we actually are going to start listing a particular child's difficulties because of this lagging skill. So if you have a child who had a hard time yesterday transitioning from car line to kindergarten, and then they had a hard time 5 minutes later changing from their outdoor shoes to their indoor shoes, and then they had a hard time 5 minutes later because they were spinning around in the hallway and accidentally hit somebody with their lunchbox, and then they were having a hard time 5 minutes after that, right? Because the teacher announced that there's going to be a school-wide assembly, so there's no recess, right? All of those areas where the child's having difficulty need to be considered and mapped before we even start to have that very first Plan B conversation with the kid. And it takes a really long time. The other thing, and this is a very brief introduction for all of y'all, right? But the other thing that's the most common mistake that people make is when they're going through the ALSUP, they actually mention the actual behavior. And you don't ever have to mention behaviors, not in the ALSUP, and not certainly when you're having a conversation with kids, right? So if this was that 5-year-old, we would list, difficulty transitioning from car line into classroom on Tuesdays when grandma drops off at school. So very specific.
Because the immediate reaction is, do you remember that one time? And that's what we want to avoid. So
They remember.
They know. They know. So if you bring it up, you're immediately going to take the frontal lobe and link it back with the part that we don't want it to connect with. And so why are you drudging up and waking up the dinosaur? Don't do that.
Right?
It wakes up by itself.
So the thing is, when we're going through the ALSUP, most of the kids that see us are going to have most of these skills relatively lagging compared to typically developing kids. Doesn't mean that they're never going to develop, it just means that there's a lag. And we don't want to give short shift to any particular lagging executive function skill. The other thing that's really cool is once you start to have the conversations with kids and one lagging skill improves, a whole bunch of other ones improve even before you got to have the conversation, because those conversations that you have with your child are forming new pathways in their prefrontal and frontal cortex. So it's daunting at first when you see that there are 1,000 unsolved problems. But then it's relieving after you get the hang of it and your child sort of gets the hang of it because they're the biggest player. They're doing most of the hard work there, right? It's hard to rewire your brain. That once they start that things roll merrily along. So the reason that I have this really giant ALSA is because this is a fun activity if you're trying to practice. And I was doing this workshop in 16 hours at a Montessori conference a couple years ago. And so what we did was we read some children's books and then completed the ALSUP on some of the book characters. But I always think it would be really fun to have like a movie night and everybody watch the good version of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, which is the original one, not the sucky one. Right? And they have each, and then break up into teams, right? And they have like each team take one of the bad kids, like Augustus Gloop, Veruca Salt, which I would kill to be on the Veruca Salt team. Violet Beauregard, who else? Mike TV. I think it was just those four. Yeah. Right? So it would be really a fun thing to do, especially if you wanted to get your feet wet, to practice doing an ALSA after you read Dr. Greene's book, The Explosive Child, which is a horrible title, right? And choose one of those characters and fill out an ALSA for Veruca Salt, because I can look. Can you go back one slide to the emotional executive functioning skills? Difficulty managing emotional response to frustration so as to think rationally, right? How about throwing yourself into the golden goose chute? But we wouldn't mention that, right? When we talk about the unsolved problem. For the unsolved problem, we would say difficulty in the goose room with Charlie and Grandpa Joe and whoever else was still surviving at that point, which it might have actually just been Veruca and Charlie. It's been a while since I saw the movie, right? So we would mention difficulty, just difficulty, where in the golden goose room, with whom, on what day, but we don't have to say difficulty in the goose room with Charlie and Willy Wonka and Grandpa Joe.
Oh, this is like Clue. Right.
Where you threw yourself into a fit on the floor and then climbed into the egg machine. We don't have to mention the behavior. Even Veruca remembers that.
So it'd be Dr. Zaraa on I-480 with the steering wheel. Okay.
On Tuesday night.
On Tuesday night in rush hour traffic.
In rush hour traffic.
That's where my lighting skills.
We're nine lanes, just narrowed down into 4 for no reason at all.
Okay, I'm getting the hang of it.
All right. So far is that clear? Like, you're not experts on the ALSA, but do you understand the importance of taking the time to take the 2 hours or 3 hours to really understand an individual child and to think about what are the skills that we want to help that child build and how do we see that? What does that look like? Oh, this is a really fun book to read if you wanted to practice with a children's picture book for doing the ALSA. Okay? Once you do the ALSA, then you can actually, maybe not that night, maybe some other night, you're going to wait for a time when your child's calm and you're going to practice your very first Plan B convo with them, right? And you're going to be horrible at it. You're going to be just terrible. Then you'll go on to the Lives in the Balance website and you'll notice that there are 3 Facebook groups for parents that are trying to learn how to do this so that you can find people that can support you who've been doing this for longer maybe than you have, which is great. And also, if you're super affluent, you can also, there's one therapist on the website that's trained by Dr. Ross Greene, but they don't take insurance. So if you need that person's name, Most people can get reimbursed through their insurance company for therapy, but for a lot of people that's not realistic. So if you want to know who that person is, come find me afterwards at 8 o'clock and I will tell you, okay?
Or you can also email me.
Yeah. So,
Plan B. We haven't.
Plan B. Let's go to the empathy step. That's the first step. There's 3 steps to Plan B. Step 1 is the empathy step. Step 2 is stating the adult concerns step. And step 3 is the invitation to problem solve. All 3 steps are really, really important. Which step do you think is the hardest?
I'll have to say it's the empathy. So I train, 2 doctors a month, a nurse, a physician assistant, social work. I have like a team of 7 people who follow me around. And this is repeated like every 30 days. And they hang on every word I say, which is ridiculous. So I say ridiculous things on purpose. And they believe everything I tell them. But one thing I have to try and teach them is how to be empathetic and convey empathy. And I do this all day, and then I come home, and it's, gotta feed the kids, gotta bathe the kids, gotta get them in bed. And that's where, for me, that, putting theory into practice becomes very difficult. And
no one at our homes respects us.
So while really all I want is it not to look like the Naked Mile after bath time, it's really a reasonable request. It's trying to empathize with why me stopping their fun at that time is really rough for me to dig down. But again, there's been other issues, there's been more serious issues where I was not available to my kids. And that escalated the situation. It wasn't even that I added anything, it's just that in the moment I couldn't connect with them and they were really upset. So one time my 2-year-old, I thought something happened. I thought she bumped her head again. No, I said, okay, what's wrong? And she goes, I have big feelings. I have no plan for that. I had no idea what to do. So I gave her a hug. And that was okay. But first step, empathy.
Yeah. All right, next slide. And next slide after that. Yes, next slide after that. This is, anyone that wants these slides can have them too. You could just ask because we shared them on Dropbox. This is a
Dr. McNamara is talking about slide number 25.
nice video from the website, which won't play because it's from Dropbox, but it plays if you go to the website, which basically has Dr. Greene describing for people the importance of the empathy step. The empathy step is important for children on many levels. First of all, the first few times that you try and have conversations with children who've had the experience of having their lagging skills result in unsolved problems many, many, many times over and over, they're not used to being asked for their input or for their perception of what happened. So when we do the empathy step, the first time especially, you want to be extra, extra careful to not mention the behavior. And instead, you would say, hey, Veruca, I noticed that on Tuesday, when we were visiting the Golden Goose Room with Charlie and Grandpa Joe and Willy Wonka, that you had some difficulty. What's up? Right? We're not going to mention the meltdown. We're not going to mention ruining the Golden Goose shoots or anything else. Right? And sometimes children who've been very damaged by interactions with us and punishments will say, I don't remember having a difficult time. Right? I don't remember. I didn't have any difficulties, right?
No.
And then people are like, forget this is stupid. I'm going to go back to 1, 2, 3 magic, right? But sometimes what we say in those moments, right, is, well, it's okay if you don't remember, But it's really important. I'd like to hear from you, what you think was going on. So let's just take a couple minutes and just think and be quiet, because this is really important to me. Because you are really important to me, and I want to understand you in a new way, in a different way, because I'm trying something different here, because I'm tired of screaming. I'm tired of, having to pretend like I'm throwing the Xbox in the garbage. Or getting in the station wagon and saying, that's it, I'm never coming home. This might be better. Give it a shot, right?
Now you can go to, back up to, yes, stop. Wait, go forward, right there. Stop there.
We are now on page 26.
So empathy, a lot of people mistake empathy, right, for trying to label someone else's experience. So let's say Veruca says, oh God, I hated being in that golden goose room. That was so frustrating. And you can say, oh, I know, that you must have felt so terrible, so awful. That's not actually empathy, right? When we teach empathy to our residents, when we teach empathy to parents, what we want them to understand is that reflecting back to somebody exactly what they said to you is enormously powerful. Oh, so Veruca, in the golden goose room, you felt really frustrated. Can you tell me anything else about that? Yeah, I felt really frustrated and I had to go to the bathroom. Oh, so in the golden goose room you felt frustrated and you had to go to the bathroom. Is there anything else you can remember? And you keep drilling down and drilling down and drilling down for more details, right? Because you want to make sure that you've heard all of the child's concerns. And that's why it takes the longest amount of time, because there's always more concern.
And just watch out that this does not happen when you scheduled it sometimes. Sometimes this will happen right at the worst possible moment that this stuff is spilling out. So when you hear it, just notice what's happening. And if the kid is doing it on their own, you kind of have to put whatever you're doing aside and just hear what happened. Their own words actually become a springboard. You don't have to be original. You don't have to be a genius at this. You just take their word, and then you just, whatever it is, and if it's a profanity, it makes the conversation even more amusing. Because I've done an entire interview like that in front of a parent, and the parent's like, oh my God, I can't believe they're doing this. But the kid said, hey, what's it feel like to have that happen?
And then the point was made that even if the kid were to swear, the idea is not to react, to simply reflect back to the child that must be what it felt like.
So just keep working with it, and what you'll find is, even if it's a generic, I was mad, okay, fine. Let's define that and figure out if that's different than all the other times. And usually what you find is it is different, and they can have more than one word for it, and they'll help you figure out how to avoid it because they don't like it. In fact, I would say that the vast majority of kids, meaning all but, in my career, one or two, if you ask them, does it feel good to be angry? Do you like fighting or breaking things or whatever? The answer universally is no. Now, these are kids who will pretty much, they can be in full contact sports, martial arts, break things with their head, under supervision of an adult martial artist type thing. But in the context of them being emotional, they don't like it. They don't want to do it. So, okay, neither do we. So if we're all agreeing on it, let's just figure out how to avoid it.
So neurochemically, what happens inside of our heads when we're deeply listened to and deeply seen and deeply understood by another person? Oxytocin. You know what oxytocin is? Look in the back row. There's like an oxytocin couple back there, right? Look how blissed out that mom is. Look at how she's perfectly meeting that baby's needs.
Baby smell. That's
Right? Oxytocin is the hormone that makes us feel bonded and attached and related and important and loved. So,
And it keeps us mammals from eating our babies.
or going into road rage on 480, right? Right? So he's taking all the time that's needed at the beginning for the empathy step, and sometimes that's as far as you get at first because kids have been hurt, right? And they don't trust us anymore. And it takes a long time to repair that relationship. But every time they experience that, of being deeply understood and accepted and heard and seen, oxytocin is coursing through their brain. And that's repairing their ability to relate and communicate with other people. So even if you don't get to the next 2 steps, doesn't matter, because you've already started to help the child heal themselves, right? With your support, with your scaffolding, by collaborating with you. Okay, next one. So, next step, empathy step. I would say for most school-age children, once you break through that barrier of them not trusting us as adults anymore, that the empathy step can take as long as a half an hour in conversation with the kid. Our step is relatively easy. We just have to tell them what our concern is, and there's a script for it, right? So the thing is, Veruca, and this is after you've restated everything she said, well, it's hot, and I hate Uncle Joe or Grandpa Joe, and I really did want a golden goose because Susie at school had one, and I thought it would be really cool, and I would have more friends, blah, blah, blah. And you restate everything that she says. And then it's your turn. It's time for the adult to state the adult concerns. And it's always about safety or learning. The thing is, Veruca, as the grown-up, it's my job to make sure that everybody's body stays safe. And the egg sorting machine is definitely not a safe place for children. That's it.
OSHA violations.
You just state your one concern, and it's about safety, right? That's all the second step is. Should take about 30 seconds. So unfair, right? Because you really want to unload on your kid about how crappy they make you feel by showing out in front of Willy Wonka. So it's really easy. The adult concern part is really, really easy. The last part, right, which is the invitation to problem solve part. If you think about what's, from a neurochemical perspective, we already said that when you do the empathy step, we're flooding the child's brain. The child is flooding their own brain, thank you very much, with oxytocin through the experience of being deeply seen and understood. In telling them what our adult concerns are, right? We're modeling for them how do you talk about things that are emotionally important but stay calm. And they're practicing empathy, even though they're not required to state back to us what our concern is. We want to make sure that they've listened and that they've heard. But when we invite them to problem solve, then, you can hold that, all of that work, all of the conversation that the child's going to have, right, is causing them to have to use their prefrontal and frontal cortex to problem solve. So they're actively doing the rewiring work with that last part of the conversation. How do you invite a child to problem solve with you? Yeah, it's really easy. You restate what their concern is and your concern. And so you say to them, I'm wondering if you could think of something different that you could try next time so that your needs of blah, blah, blah are met, and my needs of knowing that your body is safe is also met.
This gets really interesting when you do get a kid who says, oh, when I feel like that, I really want to break something. It's like, okay, but I need to keep my stuff and the family stuff okay. Mm-hmm. And then the conversation becomes, well, what can I break? And then the family looks at me and I'm like,
There's got to be something.
There's something you can break.
Yeah.
So when you figure out what the solutions are, it tends to lead to a kind of a weird conversation sometimes, but just go with it and see where it goes. one important thing about the empathy step is that make sure your cell phones are nowhere around. Okay. So one of the things that I teach doctors in training is empathy is not a phrase you can toss out. It's not a magic number of words. It's not, oh, that sounds terrible.
You must have been so upset.
Right. Next question. That's not how this works. If you want to feel like someone really understands you, you need them to listen to you. If they're interested in what you have to say, you tell them more. If they're not interested, you will tell them less. If your kid feels like you're interested, they will tell you more. Because why not? They like talking about themselves, and they will. If they feel like,
They're
that
not
it's worth
in
it.
trouble.
Yeah.
And a lot of times at first you have to keep saying that. You're not in trouble, right?
But why do you want to talk to me then?
I don't even want to talk about it. I know, you don't want to talk about it. Who would want to talk about it, right?
A parent asked, what if the problem isn't that she had an explosive episode or was unsafe? What if she's just talking back?
So, it
Well,
depends what she's saying.
It depends. It definitely depends what they're saying, and you'd have to go through and do the also first, right, to understand where's the lagging skill and why is it presenting as a difficulty in this way, in this environment, at this time.
So,
right?
so I would say that anything that your kid is doing in the moment, she's picked that skill and her and you in that particular spot for some reason. And if it gets your attention and drives you up a wall, it got your attention. So that was effective. Now you're dealing with what happens afterwards. So the question is what is she trying to say? Like, what's the point of all that energy? She's doing something for some reason.
Right.
So now it's just a matter of why is this so important to her that she feels the need to interrupt everything and bring it to a grinding halt.
So the other thing to keep in mind is when children are newly learning this skill, or teenagers are practicing this skill, because problem solving is universally a lagging skill for all of them. Yeah, I know. That's why I'm going to leave like 5 minutes for questions.
Okay.
How often do you think the first solution generated by the child is enormously successful? Never. 0% of the time. Never. Their first attempts are going to be shaky because they're not really skillful at this yet, right? So as adults, number one, we have to keep rechecking with their proposed solution to make sure that it meets their needs and our adult needs. It can't be one-sided, right? The solution to not flipping out because it's time to turn off Fortnite, the solution cannot be, well, I can play it all night long all the time. Because that doesn't meet my adult needs for you to get adequate sleep and to attend school, right? So you have to keep pressing them to try and come up with something that's fair to everybody. And the first few times, the things that they try might only be partially successful or might not be successful at all. It doesn't mean that Plan B is not working for that child, right? In fact, you want them to mess up lots so that you get to revisit and have Plan B conversations, starting with the empathy step, stating your adult concerns, and once again inviting them to problem solve, because every repetition of that sequence results in oxytocin, results in practicing empathy, and results in doing really hard cognitive work that doesn't come easy to this group of children.
Even if your attempts at this are I don't want to use failure, but let's say it was hot and messy. That maybe is a better description. So if that happens, understand that that's not necessarily a failure. As long as you still approach that heated situation with the empathy, and also just take a step back and know that if the reaction you're getting is emotional, they're not really getting the point of what you're trying to start in the first place, which is you're trying to get them to feel good, and they don't. And if you just start from there, it works out well. However, I'll say this. If you want someone to succeed at something, you give them every opportunity to practice, everywhere, all the time. Doesn't matter if they mess up a million times or not. Eventually, they get better and better and better. Practice makes perfect. I think in behavioral health is one of the few places I've seen where people expect their kids to change on the first try, or else they're grounded for life. And if I was, if someone said, hey, you can learn this bicycle, but you can try once and then you can never ride again if you screw this up, I would never learn to ride a bike. What's the point? The stress isn't even worth it. So approach it like that. With every failure, if you can roll with a failure, what that ends up doing is you actually tap into the memory center of their brain, and then you can link up the fact that, oh, remember, it wasn't that bad. If you can insert that thought into the kid's head instead of let's flip out, then it's already getting better. So to get that, you need to adjust the threat response. And if you're just approaching things with empathy left and right and not getting any results, eventually you will get that one time where it's like, yes, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. So if you can just say that to yourself, don't tell someone who's emotional it's not that bad. That's non-empathic. But to yourself, just kind of roll with it for the moment, because you have to be emotionally available.
And we wanted to save the last 5 minutes for questions because we were told that we are getting kicked out of your car at 8 p.m. So I think the question is, how long after an explosion or a meltdown? After you've already done the also, when can you address it? And the thing is that will vary from child to child. What you want to have a feeling for is, if I have this conversation 20 minutes later, is that going to trigger another, meltdown? Or if I wait for 2 or 3 days with a 5-year-old, are they even going to remember? Right? So it has to be according to your own child's needs.
I'm always really impressed by the data coming out on toddler crying. So there's this amazing NPR recording of an interview of some psychologists who figured out that when a toddler tantrums, there's actually a tone change that occurs between the anger phase, basically, and what is basically their bereavement stage, where they're mourning the loss of whatever it was that you ripped out of their hands. So, which is actually what the experiment was.
Cool.
But what ended up happening is you can listen for it, and basically the kid goes from being offended and angry, talk to your manager type of thing, to just help me out here. And what's
Barbecue
interesting,
Becky.
so then what we end up seeing is that behavior set actually over time pretty much stays about the same. As my kids have been growing older, there's a definite clear mark where it goes from everybody needs to leave me the heck alone to I'm going to get, I just want to feel better any way that I can. And when they start reaching out for help, whether it's friends, the dog, the ice cream, playing their video game, getting lost in it, if they're at that point, they're already trying to make themselves feel better versus them kind of pouring out and exploding everywhere. I think at that point, if you're dealing with aggression that's really out of control and you're about to engage that, I think that's a bad idea. If it looks like a monstrous tantrum rolling down like a tornado, don't engage. But if the energy breaks slightly and you see that they're looking more sad and they're asking for help, and usually it is that obvious, like it'll go from being profane to, whispering for mom or dad or under their breath. You can listen for it and you can move in there and do what you need to do.
A parent asked, what do you do if your child is not safe while they're throwing a tantrum?
Yeah,
So for some children, just to, make your environment less overstimulating, to not let other people chime in with their opinions about what your kid is doing, to not have like adults losing it right? So all those environmental things that we know make things worse, we want to turn down. And sometimes, some kids are so unsafe when they're having a meltdown that they need to be secluded, right? And some children are so unsafe when they're having a meltdown that we've, taught parents how to restrain children, not as a punishment ever, right? And you should never restrain a child unless you've been trained in how to restrain a child safely without escalating them and using it as a tool to help the child know that they're safe and that they're contained and that they're cared for. So that's a question that really is dependent on an individual child.
But actually, you can start, even if your kid can talk and have a conversation with you and enough to tell you who was unfair on the playground, if they've hit that milestone, then you can do a lot to talk about how they felt during a particular event and what would have felt better. And so, yes, having a conversation about the next time will do a lot to improve the success of anything that you try next time. So I think the right time to get ready for that next big explosion is not right now, but tomorrow when they're not exploding, set the stage, let them know. Because the more warnings you let them know of what you're going to do, the more likely it is that they'll be responsive. You don't want to catch them off guard with a new technique right in the moment that they're, dealing with their stuff. They'll tune you out. It just doesn't fit in with what they're familiar with. If they know what to expect, and if you start the empathy stuff when they're not having a problem, then when they do, it'll roll off your back a lot easier. You don't have to, wait, hold on, let me get the slide set. Let me take a look. There's no cliff notes for this. So start testing the waters when they're calm, and then when it gets stormy, you'll have some sort of plan, and the kid knows what to expect also.
Does the app just give you the plan? Once you fill in it all?
Actually, it gives you prompts. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So the app actually helps you sort of map out what are the unsolved problems that you're going to try and tackle first with your children, right? And then what are the prompts that you need to sort of get through those first few times.
How about one last question?
One last question.
Oh, that's you. I think that's you, yes.
Okay, all right. Sorry, anyone behind me?
A parent asked, do you have any ideas about a child who shuts down the empathy conversation and just doesn't want to be a part of it?
There's actually a lot of different techniques that Dr. Greene covers for those challenges, right, when things don't happen the way we'd expect them to in a Plan B conversation. For a lot of kids, it may be that the whole area that you're bringing up is so threatening that they can't actually find their words, and they're really irritated by that. And if you get a feel for that, sometimes kids will participate, and you can say, can I try and guess? And you can tell me if I have a horrible idea that doesn't match at all what was going on. You could go like that, or like 0 fingers. If I have an idea that sort of matches, can you show me 3 fingers? If I'm getting really warm, 4 fingers. If it's spot on, 5 fingers, right? Because have any of you ever been in trouble at work? I have. Yeah, I can actually remember the last time that I had amygdalitis. It was October 31st, 2013, right? And I was put in a situation, right, where I couldn't use my words because literally I was being hassled and attacked, right? And so, for sure, if anyone at that time, had asked me how I was feeling, I probably would have kicked them in the neck because I actually took my phone and I threw it at the wall in our conference room. And then our department administrator said I should go home for the rest of the night. So it really, really depends, and it's going to be different for every kid that doesn't want to participate in that Plan B conversation. I did have a Plan B conversation with my administrator, 2 days later, not that night, not for sure not that night, because I seriously would have run people over in my car if I would have seen them on the road, right? Because it wasn't my best self. right? And so for children that have this happen to them all the time, it still bothers me that this happened to me 5 years ago, right? And we have children that react like this dozens of times per day. How does that erode their self-concept, their confidence, right? Their feeling of somebody who's competent and can do hard things.
Also, this is not an uncommon answer. If you get a kid who is very candid and you ask them why they don't like to answer these questions, you get this very interesting answer, which is heartbreaking, which is that it's never, every time they brought up their emotions in any conversation with an adult before, it usually ends up going to a bad place. There's usually some sort of consequence, there's usually some sort of intervention or plan that actually makes the kid feel worse, not better. So really, you approaching them and talking about feelings might be the single riskiest thing that they have to deal with that day, because if they say the wrong thing, what now? So it's going to take some ice breaking to, and this is not even plan B in general, just trying to get kids of any ages to talk about what they're feeling. If there's no payoff, they're not going to do it. They're wasting their breath. So it's one thing that you can do, you can appeal to, is talking about your day. And you can pull your kid into just a regular social conversation instead of like this functional parent interrogation. And that's kind of hard to do, but you have to be really attentive when your kid responds with all the mundane drama of the day that has nothing to do with you. You have to hang on every word to make it worth their time, because then, along with that stuff, you get the empathy built in, and they're opening up communication with you. And they might be dropping some information that might be relevant to why this stuff is going on, but it's kind of getting missed with all the other stuff that they're kind of putting out there. So if you open the floodgates, you will see it happen, but it has to pay off for them. And you're not going to do this well right away. I don't think I do this well. And your kid's going to see you stumble through it, and they're going to stumble through it, and that's okay. Don't feel bad about that. That's just learning process. But if they see you trying, that actually makes a huge deal for kids. And you can do a lot to, you could probably role play yourself in front of the kid and do this with yourself. And that would be a great way to introduce the topic to the kid, and they would see from beginning to end what this will produce and whether it's worth it or not. And if that doesn't get them to buy in, well, at least when you're upset, they know what to do to make you feel better then.
Can we have a round of applause for our speakers?